a very warm welcome to you. Diolch, thank you for joining this Wales Week event, discussing the issue of brain drain and the state of the Welsh graduate economy. It's my pleasure to introduce this event and the panel. My name is Owain, not Darogan Talent, as it says there, and together with Theo, we are the founders of Darogan Talent and the hosts of this event. Theo and I met and started Darogan Talent, in fact, as students at Oxford University, at a time when we were both uncertain about the opportunities that were available to us back in Wales, and we were worrying in a way that we would become a part of this brain drain. To help support other graduates like us, we partnered with leading organisations in Wales, such as Acorn, Admiral and CCR, represented today, to raise awareness about the Welsh graduate economy. Our new online platform, launched in late 2020, which aims to highlight graduate opportunities in Wales, offers news and advice, and connects students and graduates with both each other and with employers. And alongside Theo, who will be chairing this discussion, it is also my pleasure to introduce the other panelists. Pavan Arora is a recruitment director at Acorn Recruitment. Acorn is Darogan's founding partner, having supported us throughout our development, and our UK leading recruitment specialists based in Wales. Leigh Hughes is the chair of the Cardiff Capital Region Skill Partnership. CCR are dedicated to bringing economic growth to South East Wales, and as part of this programme regularly showcase the brilliant opportunities available to graduates in the region. And finally, Ben Moriarty is a recruitment manager at Admiral Group PLC. Admiral is Wales' only FTSE 100 company, representing the shiny face of the modern Welsh economy with a big blue hat. And finally, quickly, to set the scene. The idea that Wales has a brain drain problem is not new. In a now infamous statistic from a report by the Resolution Foundation, Wales attracted 23,807 graduates between 2013 and 2016, but 44,335 left. And that is a difference, if you're good at maths, of 20,528. And that is to say, simply, almost twice as many left in that recent period than were drawn in. And in addition to this, Wales's graduate economy today faces new uncertainties. Brexit, COVID restrictions and remote working, increasing polarisation between those calling for more powers for the Welsh Parliament and those advocating strongly for less. There are plenty of challenges ahead. But, so we're not all doom and gloom, we should also consider that perhaps these challenges present new opportunities to be seized. Are greater things to come for Wales's graduate economy, a brighter future? And with that, I'll hand over now to the chair, Theo Davies-Lewis.
Thank you very much, Owain. And let me just say, a warm welcome, just to reiterate those comments and that welcome from Owain. I see you've already taken my cue, and lots of you are already on mute, which I really much appreciate. So we don't get any heckling over Zoom in the next hour. Hopefully, you won't have any good reason to be heckling either. You can stay on mute for the next half an hour, so that would be really, really useful. I'm going to start this discussion with Ben, Leigh, and Pavan over the next 40 minutes. I will hand over to ask questions. When we do that, if it's possible, if you could put them in chat, hopefully you'll be able to do that. I'll then moderate that, just because then it'll make it much more straightforward for us to put them to each of our panelists, which we really appreciate. So thank you very much. To begin with, I wanted to really dwell on that issue of the brain, which is a negative term. So I wonder to go to you, Leigh, first to begin with your focus on skills, within the Cardiff capital region and more broadly. That term of the brain drain you might have heard before. What does that mean to you? And does Wales have a problem with it?
Good morning, everyone. Bore da, croeso. Does it have a brain drain? Well, I suppose if you look at the numbers that Owain's just presented, then there is a statistical increase needed. I think from the perspective of what we're seeing is that if you were a Gen Y, Gen Z, then I would see that those figures were high. But if we're looking at Gen Z moving into Gen Alpha, we're starting to see that the people through those age groups have different priorities in where they are. So the brain drain, I think, and I predict will start to get less and less in the next coming years. I'm getting feedback on my voice. Is everybody else getting that feedback?
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. So from what we're seeing in Cardiff Capital Region is that the offer of the Cardiff Capital Region is a lot more attractive to students who are graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And we are starting to see through the Cardiff Capital Region graduate scheme, 50% of those graduates that take up a position in the scheme are from outside of Wales. So we are attracting now 50% from outside of Wales and then keeping 50% from within Wales that are moving on to the scheme. So that's a good indicator for us that Wales and South East Wales as an economic market with a high value job, high career opportunities, good well-being, good lifestyle. And these are the levers that sort of your Gen Z and your Gen Alpha are more interested in, is they're after the structured career path, looking to get involved with an ethical employer that can give them a good career outlook, training, development, mentoring. And like I said, we're starting to attract, what we have to do is work together, all of us, on the perception of Wales as a brain drain. And I think that's part of the challenge that we all have is managing the perception and unlocking the potential, because we have got some world leading sectors here in Wales in compound semiconductors, fintech and the likes. So the opportunities for growth and career development are here in a healthy lifestyle. So I'm seeing a lot of prosperity in this and opportunity in the coming years, Theo.
That's really interesting. I mean, before we came on, we had a chat with Ben, actually, from Admiral, the only FTSE 100 group we have here in Wales. I mean, just wondering on that, following on from Leigh's comments, Ben, is it more of an issue of perception then that in Wales that is? I mean, the statistics don't lie, and I'm probably an example of one of those brains who've gone to university in England, speaking to you from London today. But that's not a negative thing, I don't think, and we don't think in Darogan. But is the issue that we've got to come over is promoting Wales as best, rather than talking Wales down. So
good morning, everybody. Borda, Croeso. So I think my opinion is relatively siloed around an Admiral perspective, and I can discuss about what we've witnessed as a business in terms of the graduate market. And I mean, to cut a long story short, we don't struggle to recruit graduates. We've seen a 60% increase in application forms last year, which was which is a really positive trend, and that's a trend year on year. I think Cardiff as a city is an easy city to sell to graduates. I think it's an attractive proposition, and I think Admiral as a business is an attractive proposition in Wales and Cardiff. But I'm not saying there's not a wider brain issue within Wales, because I think there is. But I think from our perspective as a business, we're really proud and really pleased that we're able to attract top talented graduates year on year.
I'd like to go into that, the issue of Cardiff in a bit more detail later on. Before that, just to get your introductory comments, Pavan, on maybe the more sort of specialist recruitment side of things. Obviously, Acorn Recruitment work with businesses, across Wales and the UK. What have you guys been seeing, especially during COVID, over the last few months? Have you had graduates come knocking on your door, come back to Wales or to stay in Wales, or has there been a consistent trend of, different people coming to work in Wales over the last few years anyway?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, all. I suppose just in terms of the last few months with COVID, there's been a huge influx of graduates returning back to Wales. Logically speaking, that generation have been the ones that have been the most affected by not being able to secure, good jobs and employment due to the pandemic. Naturally, those individuals have moved back to their parents, back to home in Wales, to be able to settle down their finances and be able to then find local employment opportunities. So we've seen that huge influx. But in terms of a trend, I think what Leigh said was really important. a lot has shifted in Wales, and certainly the future generations, so your Gen Z and your Gen Alpha, they're in a very different position to previous generations, and a lot of it is the ongoing efforts of the Cardiff capital region, the graduate program there, but also a lot of awareness around Wales as a country and an employment destination that provides what can be deemed a better balance of work-life balance to maybe some other major UK cities. So I think a lot of the work's already done. I think the numbers will change. I do think one of the areas that we do risk maybe not making as much of an impact in is areas that are not deemed as high growth sort of sectors. So people like sort of Ben, Admiral do a huge amount of work around, business management, technology, fintech mentioned earlier, semiconductors. But there's a lot of sectors that Wales are still not quite at the leading edge on, that there's a lot of graduate degrees that are completed, and people have to leave Wales, like sort of marketing, advertising, for instance. Some engineering sectors as well. A lot of people leave the country to go seek graduate programs elsewhere.
I think, Theo, if I can come in at that point there, just to keep the call going. I think what's important to talk to graduates about is not necessarily primary the degree that they've done, but the skills and experiences they've learned doing their degree, because it might be that they're not, the first step on the career path might not be automatically aligned to the degree that they've done. But also, what are the skills and the transferable skills and the lessons and the best practice that they've learned that allow them to become an attractive employee to an employer? So I think it's a combination of speaking to graduates and making them aware, look, okay, perhaps that degree isn't the best for them, but the skills and the aptitudes and the lessons you've learned and the experiences you've learned, there are other career paths that come from that. And I think sometimes that engagement with graduates and having that conversation sometimes is an useful conversation that happens.
Yeah, can I just chip in there as well? I couldn't agree more, Leigh. As part of our recruitment process for our core graduate placements, there isn't a set discipline really as such as to what degree that we look for. And in fact, we will actually speak to around 70% of the people that apply for the positions with us, I guess, as a first screening. And what you said is really important, that we're finding people that culturally are a really good fit for us, and not really so much dependent on the level of their degree or the discipline, but what they've learned in that experience. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
That's really interesting. Thank you all for that. I mean, for me, working with Owain and Darogan over the last few months, we've obviously seen a huge interest and massive development in, employers wanting to showcase graduate jobs, which has been really encouraging for us, because that's what our role is to kind of signpost to all those different opportunities. And what we've really been pleased to see is the fact there's been a geographical diversity in some of the businesses that are coming to us. But Ben, to go back to your point about, we've talked about the perception that perhaps the statistics don't tell the whole story, but there's no getting away that there are big companies such as yourself, based in Cardiff, but obviously you've got, roles across the UK. There is some sort of perception now that Cardiff is this growing city, and Swansea as well, but perhaps the whole of Wales doesn't cater for the graduate needs of many people. What would you say to that? And is that something that can be tackled by the private sector, or does it need to be, as we saw with the Chancellor yesterday, something like free ports and all these sorts of things? I mean, how do we get graduates to come to different parts of Wales rather than just the southeast? It's
a problem. I think, like you said, there's a lot of investment in Cardiff, and you see big companies coming to Cardiff, like Deloitte, for example, Monzo, Motonova. So there's a lot of investment in Cardiff, and Swansea, as I understand it, they're supposed to be building a big sort of tech hub in the city centre, which would be interesting to see how that goes. But you're right. I think it is a problem. You really got Cardiff's and Swansea as a really attractive proposition. If I lived in a rural part of Wales and I studied a degree, I guess me specifically, I'd like to sort of move out to a big city where there's hustling and bustling and it's exciting. And other than really sort of Cardiff and Swansea and some of the other smaller cities, I can't see that really attractive proposition in the other parts of Wales.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, Leigh, just to bring you in on this, obviously Cardiff capital region is a really interesting and welcome addition to the wider economy in South East Wales. I mean, obviously you focus on that area in particular, that region. But is there a case that we need more of the likes of yourselves across the whole of Wales?
Yeah, I think what we've got is I work closely with my colleagues in the North Wales Growth Ambition Board, Economic Ambition Board, and the South Wales, the Swansea Bay City deal. And I think, you know, there's a lot of cohesion now amongst the 3 city deals in Mid Wales to make sure we're aligned in a prosperous opportunity, because whilst I represent Cardiff Capital Region here on this call, there might be people who might want to go along the A55 in North Wales and base themselves there because they'll have the flexibility then of work in Cheshire or the North Wales corridor. But then you've also got the IT and what data and analytics that are happening in Swansea Bay. So I think, but when you look at Cardiff Capital Region, it's 50% of Wales GDP and it's 50% of the populations of Wales. So naturally people are drawn there anyway. So what Cardiff Capital Region's doing through its economic growth partnership, through its city deal, is trying to, through its investment funds, make the region more attractive, not just through jobs, but also infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, because the world of work now is done through fiber. Most of it is done. Look at us today. We're on a Zoom call, you know, so it's about creating the environment for the citizens of the region to be able to work and live effectively. So you know, at the moment, we've got a couple of years of putting digital infrastructure into the home, into business that allows people to work at a 5th generation speed. We're bringing tourism in, so Zip World going up into Merthyr, you know, so you suddenly then, you know, as I say to some of my staff, I've got a UK role working for Bouygues, a global business, is for some of my staff in the Manchester office, they could travel from North Manchester into the city centre and back out, 60 minutes on a tram and see large buildings. You know, in 60 minutes, you could live in Cardiff. You could, then the weekends, you could be up in the Brecon Beacons. You could be up on Zip World having a fun time in that. Then you could be on Penarth. What I'm saying, and that environment is more of a draw now. Like I said, is the career path, but also the environment. And what we have to do is work about creating the environment that attracts people back, because the jobs and the new cutting edge companies are coming to Wales through the university relationships, through R&I, Welsh Government, UK Government. And what we're slowly doing is putting all the pieces of the jigsaw together to make it look, crikey, that really is an attractive place to work now, you know, because not only do I have a cutting edge technology, I have pharmaceuticals, I've got a breadth of opportunity. I've also got a city life. I've got a coast, I've got mountains, all within the distance of a tube track or a tram train that the other graduates dare to wish for. But again, it's that messaging, it's about making the attractiveness. And I think the environment is a much better place now there is, and that's Pan Wales. I think it's developing. We were behind the curve, and I think that's Owain's opening statements. The data was 2013 to 2016, if you record. You know, we're 5 years ahead of that. And I think, yes, I think the data might not be the same, but I think there's been a lot of work to try and close that gap. You know, you're going to have some brain drain, aren't you? Because people's aspirations. What we're doing is trying to close the gap.
And Pavan, just on the specialist sort of recruitment side of things, I mean, I totally get where Leigh's coming from and that hybrid approach. I think seeing that people want to have that work-life balance, they want to travel to different places. I mean, I think young people, graduates, demand that more than perhaps other generations as well. I just want to go back on that geographic point, because I am quite interested to see, you know, whether we can build a sustainable economy if we perhaps don't have as many jobs in Mid Wales, West Wales, rural Wales. What are you seeing from businesses? Are there those graduate jobs in different parts of the country, or is it still that pocket on one side of the M4 corridor?
Yeah, at present, or in recent years, it has been the pocket in, you know, Cardiff, Swansea, South East Wales. But I think a big change. Certainly, the gap has closed from that data that what Leigh was saying, that is a few years behind now. But the biggest change is around our way of working, right? So the majority of organisations are set up for remote working. We've seen graduates take on roles that are fully remote. We've hired graduates ourselves in our business that are going to be fully remote, that are not near any of our offices. So whilst it's probably far more complex creating jobs in some of those more rural areas that that can establish graduate programs that are really valuable jobs to that generation. Your organizations that are in the bigger cities or the bigger towns that have a graduate scheme in play already, they can tap into those candidate pools that are more rural if they offer that flexibility, which naturally comes with your work-life balance.
And I'll bring Ben in a second, but you touched upon what I wanted to speak about actually in terms of that new way of working, which I think is really, really fundamental to understand where we're going to be going in the next few years in terms of getting graduates to work in Wales, because there is, like I say, lots of the students and graduates we speak to, always ask us now, what is the balance going to be? Do you think, Pavan, looking at, the companies that you work with and their entry-level jobs, their graduate jobs, are they prepared to cater for the needs of those graduates now? And obviously generally for people that were in the workforce, are we ready essentially at transition into a new way of working in Wales?
There's still a couple of steps, I believe, for the majority of organisations, especially our clients. I think the training, the induction, that all works remotely. The mentoring part of a graduate programme, the shadowing, that's still a part of the puzzle that is certainly being solved amongst a lot of our clients. But there's an ambition that if the senior employees, if the ones that are doing the training can manage remotely, enjoy being remote, then they'll figure out. So we figured out across the business community, we figured out a lot of solutions in the past sort of 12 months. I'm confident that a few other sort of solutions around the mentoring piece, which is the feedback that we get, will be solved. I think there's another element to it as well. Whilst that might tap into more candidates, we are seeing in some sectors, if we look at technology, for instance, our clients are saying, let's go much further afield. Let's go tap into candidate pools from, people that can commute 2 hours away. So that could be mid Wales, but at the same time, it's Cornwall, it's Devon, it touches into that southwest of England piece. And on the other side of the bridge, there's employers there that are doing the same. And I think there's a piece of work around making sure that Wales is at the winning side of that, that wider geographical remit that everybody's tapping into candidates for.
Theo, can I contribute to this bit, and I think from a trend that we're seeing through as a result of what COVID is, businesses were on a digital transformation strategy. What COVID's done is accelerated it. Because obviously the environment is you still got to produce, you still got to work, you still got to be effective, you still got a bottom line to create. But picking up on a few things that Pavan's just echoed, mentoring, we're seeing across all the sectors, mentoring is becoming more to the fore. And we're seeing the business models of how graduate programs change. Whereas, and I think this is important for graduates to consider when they make their first selection of their employer. Now, if I just take my business, for example, I've got 6 businesses in the UK. We turn over 1.5 billion. I've got 4,800 employees. And how we approach graduates is different in our businesses, believe it or not. There's not consistency because of the way that we deliver our products and services means that we can offer a bit of flexibility. But for all employers, when you take on a graduate, you're usually on a 2-year program, roughly, to integrate you into the company way of working. So the companies know when they take on a graduate, they're not going to get very little return on investment until probably year 3. That's roughly when you start to get value back. So the commitment from the employer into the graduate is quite big for the first 2 years. And I think that's important from an appreciation point of view for both parties, because the graduate needs to realize the company isn't expecting massive results from them or outcomes, because there's an integration period of understanding how that organization works. So one of our companies, we have all our graduates, and we got something like 48 graduates at the moment. Half of them are on probably a 6-month rotation for 2 years in different departments. But then in another part of the business, they're in a fixed place because they are fixed on what their career path is. So they will stay coming in a graduate in that role for 2 years, and then they'll move into a career path from that. And I think where we're seeing significant value as an employer is through reverse digital mentoring. And what that concept is that digital transformation has come so fast that the old folks like me, who might just about cope with Excel and Word, whereas the graduates coming through know their Power BI, their Office 365s, they know them all inside out, and Teams and Zooms and all of this stuff, SharePoint and whatever else, and so what we've found great success is that you become a reverse digital mentor, and then you have a mentee, which is someone like me. So I'm a board director, but I've got a young girl from Scotland who's my reverse digital mentor. She's teaching me once a month on how to work in the digital world. And what that does is break down barriers between senior people and graduates, and that's there's this perception of I can't talk to the senior people. But in business, I need to learn digital tools and how to operate. So it breaks some barriers because then it gets the graduates talking to senior management, and suddenly they build relationships, and then that nervousness factor goes. And then when you go back to the office, then you can bump into them in the corner and say, "How's it going, Nicola? How's it going?" This, and suddenly those barriers are gone. So I think there's a definite lots of ideas that have been driven and innovation been driven through COVID. It's not just about working from home. The innovation is that at the end of the day, we're not socially distanced. What we are is physically distant because we're not in the same place, but we're socially connected just through different means. And I think there's so much learning that's come from this. I think the graduates who are perhaps on the call who are coming through the system now will have a different landscape in front of them than the ones who have just finished their graduation schemes. So it's very dynamic in the employer market at the moment on how to integrate graduates and make them feel part of an organization.
Yeah, as David Bowen's put in the chat, that's a great idea, Leigh. I mean, it sounds very, very interesting, which is good to hear. I mean, what about the Admiral perspective then, Ben? Just on what you're seeing, because obviously you run graduate programs. You're a kind of, if I can say, like traditional sort of business. Obviously, you're innovating all the time, but you're a well-known, established business. Has your approach changed? Leigh's outlined some innovative things that are going on, and perhaps given us the broader sort of sector outlook. How have you adapted to the changes now, and how has COVID accelerated any of your plans in terms of the graduate space?
Yeah, so I mean, last year, mid-pandemic, we were due to run our internship program, and I was curious really to see what the appetite would be from the business to run with the internships, and what the resource would be like, and how we manage it, and how could we give them that traditional Admiral experience, and we run with it, and I think we had to adapt quite quickly in terms of the technology that we were using, and but the exposure as well that we were giving them to certain projects within the business. So the senior managers within the business are very bought into the internship. They were given regular presentations on a weekly basis. So the CEO, the CFO, the COO were meeting with them, which is a great experience for them. They were given grad buddies and senior mentors as well, which was really, really interesting. We were able to send them Just Eat gift vouchers on the Friday of their first week, which they really appreciated. And I think we just had to amplify really our engagement with them. They were all, like a WebEx room, day in, day out. They could partner off, and it was very well constructed. And I think what made it a real success was the buy-in from the senior managers and the business. And that buy-in, I guess, is both from having excellent grads in the past, and where they've been able to add so much value, and it's a really good return on investment for us.
No, that's really interesting. I'll hand over in the next 5-10 minutes to our audience, where hopefully we'll have some questions. But just back to Leigh on those really interesting points you mentioned, Leigh, in terms of the reverse mentoring. That's super interesting. What I wanted to finish on from my side of things was looking at companies more broadly and how they treat graduates and how they work with them. And you've touched upon it there. do you think now that they're, especially in the middle of a pandemic, that people have started to maybe appreciate kind of the future generations in a company a bit more? Because it sounds as if it is, and they're actually adding a lot of value. Has that changed because of COVID, or was it always the same? It might be a simple question, but it's just...
I don't think it's changed. What it's done is speeded things up, Theo. Like I said at the beginning, if you, and I'm sorry to categorize gens here now, but I'm going to have to do it from an employer because I can only do it based on how we see graduates, and over the last 10 years. If you looked at typically a Gen Y graduate, right? Gen Y at that time in the world, they were heavily career focused. They wanted to go into a blue chip organization. They wanted to become a director or a senior person by the time they were 30 years of age. And if they couldn't see that career path, they were likely to have done about 4 career moves or 4 employer moves by the time they were about 32. So from an employer perspective, when you look at a CV and you see that, and you think, oh, I know I'm trying to build up a legacy, and I'm trying to bring up a low churn of staff. I want solidarity in my business. Do I want this person who's going to not buy into it? And we started to see a shift towards Gen Z. Gen Z, you started to be more of worldly wide and socially aware. And there was, yes, I want a career path, but I know what? I'm a graduate. I know I'm not an expert yet, but I'm going to use the first 4, 5, 6 years to gain experience in an employer, but an employer that's got a good structure, a good graduate program. That's going to allow me then to give me the foundations of business that allows me to expand and grow. So they weren't so worried about salary at the point, whereas Gen Y were like, I'm a graduate, I deserve £50,000, bang, and that was it. Anything less, they weren't interested, Gen Z started to change a bit, and we saw the trends. Then there's more of, have you got a career plan for me? What is your L&D as a company? What are the initiatives that help me build on my graduate program, give me the business skills and the worldwide learning skills that allows me to flourish, because I know my career is 30, 40 years. So they were sort of saying, yes, I acknowledge my first 10 years in industry is about learning and gaining experience, gaining knowledge and so forth. And as we move into the Gen Alphas, they are now sort of more aware of climate, more aware of environmental factors, more aware of health and well-being and mental health, because, they would have been 14, 15, 16 going in. And, when you think of the amount of suicide that was happening in school children, is such a high percentage because the pressures of exams and so forth. So now they're sort of influenced. So it's now about diversity, inclusion. What are the opportunities? I'm going to career change 4 times in my career life. So what does that mean? What you start with isn't what you're going to end up with. And I think there's more awareness with young people now of, yes, I want to do this, but actually through life, I might change because circumstances change. So I think there's a lot more awareness with graduates these days, and they're more open to conversation, more open to the overall package that an employer can give them. And I think from an employee's point of view, I'm seeing much more job satisfaction, and employers then are embracing it and giving it back. So it's job security, and what you're trying to do then is build continuity in your business plan, that your leaders for the future are from within. So a lot of businesses you grow your own programs. So you're growing your own graduates and you become your future leaders. And I'm seeing that as a positive trend for graduates. It's an opportunity.
I'm just on that then, Pav. Are you seeing the graduates demanding that sort of thing in terms of having a purposeful organisation? There's such a trend now with things like ESG, with diversity and inclusion and things like that. Is that, as Leigh just touched on there, is that a demand actually from graduates which are kind of being driven through companies at the minute?
It is the biggest demand. It's the employer value proposition. It's the values. It's the, it's sustainability. It's diversity, inclusion, mental health awareness. It's and it's not just around the statement. It's around, can we see actions that the organisation has taken, if it's to do with sustainability or climate change or around diversity. Are they? And the organizations that we see that are attracting some of the best graduates out there, or attracting some of the best staff, are the ones that are able to kind of demonstrate what they've done at the forefront of all of their employer value propositioning.
And do you think, just to go back with that, Pav, are employers responding quickly enough to do that? Because I know you see it in the media, some companies are not responding as well as others. And, we don't have to name any names, but, in Wales, are we ahead of the curve? We've mentioned that a few times in different topics. How are we doing in Wales in those issues?
just like a lot of things, as Leigh has mentioned, COVID has sped up a lot of things, and I think it's in that COVID period, especially around diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of work that has happened. From the Welsh government have a public appointment strategy. The BBC have come out recently and they've detailed out their strategy and their goals for diversity and inclusion and the makeup of their workforce. And that naturally, as the top tier of employers out there sort of have already taken those actions, that naturally then sort of trickles down and filters into smaller organizations. So I think it's the conversation at most boardrooms across most companies, whether enough action's been taken in certain organizations, sectors yet, that's still to be seen, but the conversation is certainly there.
Before I turn to some of those questions that are coming into the chat, so please do put them in there and I will come to as many as I can. Ben, just to conclude on that point then, Pav mentioned those, big corporate boards and how they're reacting to this change. I mean, I know, not just because they're on this call, Ben, but Admiral's a very purposeful organisation. I mean, not just because of its Welsh roots, but, I mentioned to you the senior management change that they've had recently, and people have seen, the values of Admiral come out quite clearly. Is that something, driven by, your own company values? But, can companies like such as yourself further to sort of attract graduates with those kinds of values? Is it that's just as important as the salary, as the location? Is that really at the heart of your graduate recruitment strategy, as well as to demonstrate and communicate that to students and graduates?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Our attraction strategy is based on diversity and finding top talent. And it will always be at the heart of what we do, and that's driven from the very top of the business. So without a shadow of a doubt.
Great, thanks, Ben. And there are a couple of questions that have come in, and I will put them to each of you. We've got one that's come in from Anna McAdam, and we've got about 20 minutes for these now, so I'll try and rattle through them quickly. Anna asks, when it comes to recruitment practices, do you feel you are identifying the best talent? Graduates with social capital are much more application savvy. How do you think you can help students and graduates who aren't applying for jobs because they don't identify with the language/business environment, etc.? Maybe, Ben, let's go to you with that one, because you'll deal with graduates on a daily basis and through your cycles. What would you say to that?
It's a really good question, and I agree with you. Traditionally, we're not a very corporate business. We enjoy engaging. I think the key is engagement is the answer to your question. That's about us as a business getting out there to the graduate community. And if I'm honest, car insurance isn't the sexiest of subjects to talk about and sell as a business. But I think how we operate as a business and how informal we are as a business and how do we get that across to the graduate community is really, really important. And it's quite simply about us being able to speak to people, for people to be able to see into Admiral as a business. And it's our job really to get out there as much as humanly possible, and showcase that we're not your standard corporate company.
And Leigh, just on the skill side of things, because that's I think quite an interesting one, because you might have the graduates that have got the ability and the skills, but they just don't know. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of Darogan, that we kind of wanted to make sure we have a sort of platform to connect graduates. But with CCI, it seems as if that you there have done this very well in terms of your outreach, because I know your team, that you're doing this quite well already.
I think we've been fortunate, and I can see that some of the team, Laura and Geraldine, are on the call. I think what we've done, honestly, is learn lessons, and I think that's why graduate feedback and employer feedback is critical, because you have to constantly review your business plan and your model of how you're going to improve and make the offer better. We've learned a lot in the first 2 years of the graduate scheme on where the bits weren't going so well, and what we needed to change to make it more attractive, and the mentoring and looking after people and having a single point of contact. Because I think what we have to everybody has to accept that each and every one of us is an individual person, and our DNA is different from everybody else. So whilst the large companies might have a HR department with a structured L&D program and so forth, and certain individuals might be suited to that, there are graduates who like the family SME environment, and that environment and that organization might not have the capacity to organize, plan, mentor, facilitate, but they have the need for a graduate to help grow their business or to sustain their business, because the world is changing so fast. Some people need graduates just from a fresh pair of eyes into a family SME environment. And I think that's where the scheme comes is very useful, because there they act as the conduit and the go-between, the egg timer, the middle of the egg timer that allows the facilitation to happen. And I think that's where your platform will also become successful about linking relationships up. I think personalities is matching personalities is going to be key going forward, I think. And you know, businesses realize that when you recruit someone, you're recruiting someone that's very green. So, you know, it's got to be a mutual appreciation of everybody, really. And I can see that there's quite a few questions coming through now, Theo. So whether you want to.
Yeah, I will take some of those now. Just very briefly on that, Pav, if you can just jump in, because I'm interested on the recruitment side of things specifically. Historically, you know, some people, you know, would look at recruiters and think, you know, you just look at salary, location, all these things we've mentioned, but we've touched upon wider trends that are influencing decision making now as well. On that particular question, you know, in terms of Acorn, are you finding that your own job is changing a bit to try and tell companies how they get out there and engage with people as best as they can?
It's the employer branding, we call it, in the messaging, and ultimately, you know, the way that the question reverted back to sort of how do we encourage those that aren't applying, that aren't as sort of that don't have as much sort of social capital. And it's, for me, the organizations that are winning are the ones, you know, like Ben outlined at Admiral. It's outreach, it's being at, you know, university campuses and identifying and explaining the skills and the traits that you look to hire, rather than like the degree course or the background. I think the challenge comes, and this is where your platform really fits in, Theo, is around representing those organizations that can't do as much, all of that outreach, that are smaller in nature, that might not have all the answers when it comes to their graduate program. But the way that people are applying for jobs is drastically changing. There's not one way. It's not, you know, it's not just job advertising platforms. It's not just LinkedIn anymore. There's dozens of ways that employers are asking for applications to come in, and there's dozens of ways that different graduates perceive how they should be applying for jobs. So I think looking steps forward amongst all the work that is happening across Wales, would be quite important to be able to marry up that gap between the two.
And there's a question coming in from Sean Furlong Davis, and I think I'll just come to you on this, Leigh, because it's something that we've touched upon already. Focuses more specifically on the geographic diversity of Wales and employers, and specifically asking, what steps do you think can be taken now to really support SMEs and the areas of Wales beyond Cardiff and Swansea to support the retention of graduates? We've touched upon that, but just a reflection on that question, Leigh, before we move on to the next one.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great question, and if I'm honest, NBC, because I think what we have to do, like I touched on before, is put in the support infrastructure in place to allow those things to happen. Because if, you know, like I say, there is a cohort of people who want to take that career route, but what we have to look at is the barriers and the restrictions that allow that to happen, and that's where the city deals and everything come into play with the government funding. So if you need to, you know, the world of work, no matter which sector you're in, has to now move and live and survive. Other than probably, and I would even go as far as farming, you know, it involves digital. Digital embraces every sector, and for any function, organizational function, whether that's uploading or claiming money or forms and so forth, the digital world is here to stay, whether we like it or not. So we have to allow and make sure that the support infrastructure is in place from a digital and a transport. We then have to look at what support in terms of resource are these SMEs given, because like I said, they have a small overhead to remain competitive in the market that they're operating in. They can't have lots of staff to increase their overhead because the margins won't be there. So how does the likes of Cardiff Capital Region and Mid Wales Growth Funds, how do they work and support those businesses until they have the ability to scale up? And And I think that's where the engagement with those businesses is important to say, right, what do you need? And then you can do a gap analysis of the region. Yeah, so you can go, you jump in your helicopter and you go back up and you say, right, I've got the human resource because the graduates want to stay. So my human factor is there. I got 20% retention and that equals X 100. I've got business infrastructure because there's enough SMEs in the market. Those SMEs have the opportunity to grow, no or yes. If the answer is no, then there's a misalignment there somewhere. If the infrastructure in the business has the opportunity to scale up and grow and it needs some graduate level input, then, okay, so you work with the identification of them and what do they need? So I think what that done then is create a regional gap analysis of how do you support business growth. And I know that sounds very process and analytical, but what you have to do is put the foundations in place to allow these graduates to stay, because otherwise they can become disheartened, discontented within 2 years that I got no broadband speed. I can't get to place A, X, Y, and Z. You know, I live in Llanelli, but my head office is in London. You know, but I've got 100 yards away. I'm walking on the beach. You know, but then I can drive to Port Talbot, jump on the train, and an hour and a half I'm in London in my office. You know, so what I'm saying is that the infrastructure for me is very much, but Mid Wales, and again, so I think it's an appreciation of what does the employee look for and what infrastructure needs to be in place to create the right environment that allows that economy to flourish and grow, because they will have specialisms in their area. So I think it's a collective, and I'm not sure if that answers Sian's, is it Sian, sorry, your name was? Like that is, but I think it's the steps being done is about business engagement with universities to say, right, is the gap, so for Aberystwyth, I can see is Aberystwyth with university. So have Aberystwyth got an understanding with the local employers around the environment that's there that allows that to happen? If not, who do they work with to put that infrastructure in place then that they can advertise it to the ground? Say, look, you don't need to, because bandwidth is the same here as it is in Cardiff. Infrastructure is here in the same place in Cardiff. Career lifestyle, same area. Okay, so I think it's about being honest, first of all, being honest and doing that gap analysis.
Thanks, Leigh. We've got a question here from Llenos Carpenter, who says, we are seeing a significant increase in employers underrepresented groups at Cardiff University to help increase diversity in applications recruits. Have you found any particular recruitment strategies effective to help you achieve this? Again, it's something we've touched upon, but Pav, we talked about this just now, but with Acorn, with the companies, the clients you work with, what are the specific strategies that have paid off rather than those? You've talked about engagement already, but is there anything in particular that companies can be doing better?
Yeah, the sort of three areas to it, and they're the areas that we've seen the most success in with working with some of our clients. And when we're talking about underrepresented groups in Wales, based on recent surveys that have come out, a lot of the time it's ethnic minorities and those with a disability. The disability confidence scheme, which is a government scheme which helps employers understand and access the talent pool of people that have a disability. And for us, that particular scheme works really well in terms of engaging that particular talent pool. And then for people that come from ethnic minorities, there's a lot of organisations and a growing number of organisations that are applying what's called the Rooney Rule, which is effectively positive action, and it guarantees an interview for people from an ethnically diverse background, if that is an underrepresented group in their organisation, as long as they meet all of the skills that are required. We've seen organisations that have gone from 0% ethnic minority representation in their business to sort of 5-6% within a 12-month period because of that action that they've taken, which represents the population in Wales. And then on top of that, the third piece then is around the gender balance within organisations, and we've seen names being removed from sort of CVs and applications, for interview selections being a key sort of recruitment strategy around ensuring that there's a fair balance that get through to interview. Typically, then in Wales, when it comes down to an interview selection, we typically have quite a diverse selection that's picked from. A lot of the time, it's around getting candidates that are diverse into an interview sort of process.
Great. No, thanks, Pav. And before I move on, we've got probably time for one or two other questions, so please do put them in the chat. But Ben, just reflecting on that last question on the diversity strategies in particular, what's the Admiral approach to this? Because obviously your recruitment strategies are probably changing over time, as we've touched upon. Is there a way that you found that you've actually tried to target those underrepresented groups yourselves in Wales and elsewhere?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we last year we signed the Female in Tech Charter, which has been really good. But also what we've been doing is teaming up with local community groups from the BAME population and within the universities. And I guess we're just trying to be as visible as possible and opening up discussions and conversations. So if there are a group of candidates from the BAME background and they were interested in software engineering, or they're studying software engineering, we've been having regular conversations and one-to-one discussions with these potential candidates. So I guess what we're trying to do is create more of an open forum and become more visible.
Super interesting. Thank you so much for that, Ben. I just wanted to dwell on one thing that I think you mentioned, Leigh, before I go back to the audience with questions, was on the university aspect, actually, because I know it's been sort of under the surface with some of those questions we've had. But is there any way that, not just the skills partnership and Cardiff Capital Region, but are there any ways that businesses can work more effectively with universities on retention? Because that seems to be the huge elephant in the room, is that obviously, to be a graduate, sometimes you've had to have gone to university, although that's not always the case now. Can we be doing more, Leigh, with universities in terms of the private sector and the public sector, working with them to get graduates into the best jobs?
Quick answer, yes. But I think what we've got to appreciate, and I think this is where we've made significant progress in the Cardiff Capital Region in the last 2 years, is that you have to get the universities to act as a regional offer. The universities is a competitive market, that's the reality of it. And trying to attract students and graduates and postgraduates and doctorates and so forth. It's, they need students, and especially with the pandemic. But I think what you have to do is get those universities to work together collaboratively. And I'm pleased to say that the universities of South East Wales are now represented on the boards with a single person representing all universities. And we saw that as a massive step forward. And in fairness, the universities' engagement at both regional economic level, at regional skills level, is one of the fundamentals, because they then involved in the writing of the plans, the employment and skills plans that allows, so they have visibility for the next 5 years of where we see the employer trends are. Because what you tend to see with universities is they're set in their ways, and the agility and flexibility to meet employer needs, sometimes through the life of generating a new qualification, takes 3 years. And in Ben's world, most probably, when you're looking at AI and for data and analytics, they must probably looking in the backgrounds, looking at where customer trends are going. It was in software and data, which probably isn't being taught in university. So we're talking to universities, say, right, let's do some degrees, but actually let's leave year 3 blank at the moment, and let's be flexible so that when year 3 comes, because the world is moving so fast, we finalize the modules at the end of year 2, so I think the most important thing we have to do, and what we've done through our priority sectors, is we make sure that the university representative sits on every sector board that allows them to then have access to employers, to understand what employers' needs are, that allows the university then go, actually, well, of those 12 modules being delivered that year, there's none of them applicable to what the employers are asking for. So then so the early engagement, early intervention with employers then allows the universities to track their modules and the suitability with the modern world of work, is something that's started, but I think is an area that needs to improve. And I'm happy to say that in our region, the universities are well on board with that, and understanding where the economic levers are, because what that does is allows universities then to signpost to key companies, look, this is where we are with R&D. This is the flexibility in our programs. We can deliver you undergraduates, postgraduates, doctorate courses because we've listened to you. And this is where we are. So they're tailoring the offer now to the employers rather than, and by going to the offer to the employers, it then feeds down into the graduates as they're coming through, because the relationship exists then between university and employer. So there's confidence in the course that's being delivered. So yes, so I just think in early engagement, on open and honest, transparent discussion about what the modules are and suitability with the operating model of the business and the sector. And then once you get that, you've got some harmonization of employer needs. So demand and supply are aligned.
Thanks, Leigh. And we're coming to the end of our discussion now. So I'm going to give you all, hopefully I'll come back to you at the end, 30 seconds, if I can, to tackle the brain drain. Pav, just a reflection on what we've discussed. You talked about all these different strategies, how trends are moving in recruitment. 30 seconds on, the title on Wales's brain drain discussion on the graduate economy. What does Wales need to do to get the best graduate talent here in the next few years?
On the path it's going, I think the gap is already closed far more than it has in recent years. COVID, a lot of changes in employers have sped up that process. It's just being aware that we're not where we want to be, but it's staying on the path and keeping up the momentum of promoting all of Wales as a destination for great graduate jobs programs, and the employers are within it.
Ben?
Excuse me. I would agree with Pavan in that I think we are going in the right direction. For us as a business, it's looking more and more positive year on year. I think Cardiff is becoming more and more of a destination. And I just think maybe we need to do a lot more in attracting some of the sort of big tech companies as well, and looking further afield to bring investment into some of these city centres and develop.
And Leigh, the final word.
Show off better. And I just, it's as simple as that, because like I said, I got a UK role and I go off, and when I go to the West Midlands, when I go to the Northwest, when I go to London, they are loud and proud of what they're trying to achieve, and they show off. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. Whether there's any substance to it doesn't make a difference, but they're good at showing off. Whereas, Welsh people by virtue of nature and our DNA is we're a bit shy and a bit inhibitive, and we like to first of all test things and this, and I just think, let's be loud, let's be proud, and let's show off. Don't be frightened to show off. Show off to everything. Stop thinking small, start thinking big.
That's the message to everyone on the call. Thank you very much, Leigh, and thank you to Ben and Pavan as well for joining us today on this panel. That does bring us to a close, and I'm sure you're all in back-to-back Zoom meetings now, so I will let you. Thank you very much to all of you as our panelists for joining us. Thank you as well to the audience. I'm sure you can pick up the discussion with Pav, Ben and Leigh on their respective LinkedIns, which I'm sure you can track them down and ask them questions. Otherwise, of course, if you'd like to keep in touch with us at Darogan, you can look at our website, darogantalent.cymru, and of course, we're across all the usual social media channels. And lastly, a huge thank you, of course, to Wales Week London, Wythnos Cymru Llundain, for hosting this event. We're absolutely delighted to be involved. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Anne.
Yeah.
Bye now.